Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Laba Girbartari Gopi Janaba Laba Girbartari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayam Shabam Sabradajikachaya Stote Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnubham Sabradajikachaya Stote Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Go Premanandi! Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're continuing our discussion of the spiritual roller coaster ride. Up, down, and sometimes out, and then back in again. And we're having that discussion based on the history of Ajamila. And today's verses are meant to put the fear of God in you. Because when you hear about the apparently sublime qualities that Ajamila had as a boy, you're going to wonder, how can we have anything but a most precarious position? How can we be safe? And I don't want you, after you chant these verses, I don't want you all running for the door when you hear about what Ajamila evidently had going for him and how he blew it. Ayam hi shruta sampanna Shila Vrita Gunalaya Drita Vrito Mridurdanta Satyavan Mantravich Chuchi Gravagnyatiti Vridhanam Shushrusho Anahankritaha Sarvabhuta Suhit Sadhu Mitavag Anasuyakaha. I am this person known as Ajamila. He indeed Shruta Sampanna, well educated in Vedic knowledge, Shila, of good character, Vritta, good conduct, Guna, and good qualities, Alaya, the reservoir, Dritavrita, fixed in the execution of the Vedic injunctions, Mridu, very mild, Danta, completely controlling the mind and senses, Satyavak, always truthful, Mantravit, knowing how to chant the Vedic hymns, Shuchi, always very neat and clean, Guru, the spiritual master, Agni, the fire god, Atiti, yes, Vridhanam, and of the old household members, Shushrushu, very respectfully engaged in the service, Anahankrita, without pride or false prestige, Sarvabhuta Surhit, friendly to all living entities, Sadhu, well behaved. No one could find any fault in his character. Mitavak, talking with great care not to speak nonsense. Anasuyaka, not envious. Please bear in mind, the Yamadutas are speaking. And there's a reason why they're speaking in this way. So now let us hear what Ajamila had going for him. And putting it all in context, let me warn you again. You might think, well, if this is what happened to him, why should I think that I have any long-term standing in bhakti? Perhaps I should just give up now. Avoid the traffic jam. In the beginning, this Brahmana named Ajamila studied all the Vedic literatures. He was a reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities. Firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions, he was very mild and gentle, and he kept his mind and senses under control. Furthermore, he was always truthful. He knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, and he was also very pure. Ajamila was very respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, guests, and the elderly members of his household. Indeed, he was free from false prestige. He was upright, benevolent to all living entities, and well-behaved. He would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. You're thinking, this guy's a saint. Who is he to compare? How can we compare to him? Purport. The order carriers of Yamaraja, the Yamadutas, are explaining the factual position of piety and impiety, and how a living entity is entangled in this material world. Describing the history of Ajamila's life, the Yamadutas relate that in the beginning he was a learned scholar of the Vedic literature. He was well behaved, neat and clean, and very kind to everyone. In fact, he had all good qualities. In other words, he was like a perfect Brahmana. A Brahmana is expected to be perfectly pious, to follow all the regular principles, and to have all the good qualities. The symptoms of piety are explained in these verses. Srila Viraraghava Acharya comments that, that Dritavrata means Dritam Vratam Stri Sangha Rahiyatmaka Brahmacharya Rupam. In other words, Ajamila followed the rules and regulations of celibacy as a perfect brahmachari, and was very soft-hearted, truthful, clean, and pure. How he fell down in spite of all these qualities, and thus came to be threatened with punishment by Yamaraja, will be described in the following verses. Om Jnana-Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitang Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. The Yamadutas want you to know that Ajamila is fit to be punished. They're explaining his righteous, pious background, and they're doing that in an accusatory way. They're not just glorifying Ajamila because of his wonderful past. They're pointing out, this is what he was, and now look what he became. Let's speak a little bit about the Yamadutas, Yamaraja, the Vishnu Dutas. Our tendency is to banish anything that we can't conceive of into the category of mythology. So many times mythology can simply mean what I can't conceive of. I can't conceive of any creatures like the Yamadutas. I can't even conceive of there being reactions to my actions. This talk about karma is being taken too far. How can I believe that there's a system of reward and punishment? It's just all about me And I'm well-intentioned. Most people will describe themselves in that way, right? I'm no saint, but there's a lot of persons worse than me. I'm just trying to make my way through the universe, make it up as I go along, with good feelings in my heart for all living entities, as long as they're not edible. And I try to enjoy myself. Everyone does, right? I mean, sometimes people get hurt, but that's the way it is in this world, I mean, as nice as you try to be, you're going to step on someone's toes. The main thing, and we discussed this yesterday, is I need to uncover my potential and act on it. If I just get that chance, I want relationship potential. I want career potential. If I can just be me in terms of my talents, my abilities, then whatever else happens, old age, disease, death, let it be. We have complete blinders in terms of how a real human being should be destination conscious. Every action that I'm doing, every habit that I have, and we discussed habits yesterday, all are bringing about a certain destination. So if I want to change my destination, I need to change my system, and my system is made of various small habits. And the bhakti practice is all about the sum total of various habits, activities for reviving our dormant Krishna consciousness. We didn't discuss the previous verse, but there, the Yamadutas explain, since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. Now, do you feel that? You feel that just because you're in material nature, you're associated with material nature, you have a material body, do you feel like you're in an awkward position? No, it kind of feels kind of natural, doesn't it? At least when you're young and in your 20s and 30s. The body seems to have potential, doesn't it? The body can feel this, it can do that, it can interact in this way and that way. But awkward situation? Of course, as the body starts to age and deteriorate, and as various diseases come and go, and as you start to lose your good looks, then you start to wonder. But you can easily hide from that reality by just plunging into the affairs of your children and grandchildren. And kind of live life through them. Feel youthful through your children and your grandchildren. You get a feeling that my life is being extended. I've made my mark in this world. I've got my dynasty. Of course, in the second canto, what does Shukadeva Goswami call such an entourage that you assemble? He says, fallible soldiers. Deha patra kalatra dishu atmasanyesha satshapi tesam pramata nidinam pasyan apina pashyati. These soldiers, this entourage that we surround ourselves with, cannot protect us. In a crisis, in an acute crisis, and certainly the time of death is an acute crisis, you're flying your own plane. Others are gathered around you, sympathizing, trying to do this and that, to tinker with the externals of your situation. But internally, it's nightmarish. The worst nightmare. And who can help you? Who can prevent you from experiencing the reactions to your actions? So what about Yamaraj and his judgments? And what about the hellish planets? That can sound really mythological, right? The hellish planets. But even on this earth, you'll find hellish situations. Why then do we think that there are no hellish destinations in the universe? Of course, this notion of burning eternally in hell, the Bhagavatam doesn't speak of that. What you do, if you have such a lifestyle that takes you by the judgment of Yamaraja to the hellish planets, what you're doing is being trained up on these special locations so that you can accept hellish conditions in your next body. In other words, how do you go from a human being, spirit soul in a human body, to being a spirit soul in a dog's body? You have to be trained up first. So that's what the hellish planets do. They work you over, they train you up so that you accept a hellish body. So the hellish planets are intermediary. They're training grounds so that you will accept no matter what hellish body material nature offers you. And as Lord Kapil Dev points out in the third canto of Bhagavatam, Janturbai Bhava Etasmin Yam Yam Yonam Anuvrajat. The amazing thing about the illusory energy, Maya, is that no matter what kind of body the spirit soul, no matter what kind of material body the spirit soul accepts, the conditioned soul feels at home in that body. So you don't see human beings who have developed consciousness compared to other species of life. You don't see human beings protesting. Why am I in this thing? Why do I have this thing? It feels natural. You don't see chickens or pigeons or ducks protesting. Why do I have this duck body or chicken body? Everyone in their body feels natural. That's the sweet benediction of Maya. But as we pointed out, you have to be trained to accept your next body, especially if it's hellish, particularly if it's hellish. And that's what the hellish planets are for. They're training grounds so that you can go to whatever is your next body and you'll be acclimated to suffering. Yamaraja only sees those who have a storehouse of bad karma, sinful activities. He doesn't see those who are going to the heavenly planets. But these days, that would be a very rare number, if at all. But previously, the Yamadutas explained that actually everyone has a date with the Yamadutas. Everyone, that is, who's performing karmic activity, whether good or bad. So why is that? The way the universe is so constituted, the Yamadutas explain, is that if you're addicted to the path of karma, whether good or bad, sooner or later you're going to slip up. So the Yamadutas assure you, sooner or later, we have an appointment together. We'll be there for you. Because maybe not in this lifetime, but in a next lifetime or a next lifetime, you're going to slip up with your karmic activity. You're going to make a mistake, and you won't atone for that mistake, and so therefore, we'll see you. So basically, in previous verses, the Yamadutas have explained that more or less everyone in the material world is a candidate for punishment sooner or later, because the universe is rigged in that way. You can't win for long. Even if you think, well, I'll die and then because of my good karma activities, I'll get a nice birth. Yes, that's possible, but the path of fruitive activity, karmic activity, is so complex, sooner or later you're going to slip up. And that's why the Yamadutas have that assurance, that self-assurance. Sooner or later, if not this lifetime, the next lifetime, we'll meet up. Now you hear the list of Ajamil's qualities. But first, let's make sure we understand this point about the awkward position in material nature. Why do we have this false sense of competence? I've got my senses, my working senses, my knowledge acquiring senses, I've got my mind. I'm well suited for handling most things, most challenges that come my way. I've got what it takes to make a mark in this world in some way. We fail to realize we're like a swimmer dropped in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That means no matter how great your swimming ability is, you can't make it to the shore on your own. What does the Pacific Ocean care about your swimming ability? All right, you swam for 10 kilometers in the ocean before you went under. Someone else could only swim for 2 kilometers before they went under. Someone couldn't swim at all. They immediately went under. But in such an awkward situation, everyone goes under, unless they have superior power going for them, unless they've taken shelter of a superior power. So therefore, the Yamadutas explain in the previous verse to today's, since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. But if, in the human form of life, he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this position can be overcome. Taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotee. That's the bhakti program. All the habits, all the protocols, all the rules and regulations are geared for our understanding Krishna. And that means Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes. In that way, we're always in association with Krishna. So the Bhakti Yoga system is all about inculcating, developing habits through prime activities that bring about Krishna's association, that bring about the devotee's association. Now, what happened to Ajamil? You heard the long list of his stellar qualities, didn't you? Studied all the Vedic literatures, reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities, firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions, very mild and gentle, mind and senses under control, truthful, knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, very pure, respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, guests, and the elderly members of his household. Free from false prestige, upright, benevolent to all living entities, and well-behaved. Would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. You know, this guy's out of this world, isn't he? There's a problem here. Ajamila's background is exemplary material mode of goodness. He was not a bhakta. The material mode of goodness is the highest level of existence in the material world, but it's not transcendental. It's not above material nature. Therefore, it's precarious. The waves and the winds can shift, and without shelter at Krishna's lotus feet, you can lose your footing in the mode of goodness and plummet. And that's what Ajamila is demonstrating. Now, I always have to add a caveat in discussing Ajamil's past, his exemplary, stellar past. We should not develop scorn for the material mode of goodness. The problem here, though, is that Ajamil is just in the mode of goodness. He's not transcendently situated in bhakti. The little bhakti is there on the side. The main meal is good karma, pious activities for going to the heavenly planets. This is why in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna warns you, don't be overpowered, don't be overwhelmed by the flowery words of the Vedas. Because so much of the Vedas is about material elevation. In other words, if you're actually a first-class materialist, you'll be Vedic. Because the Vedic good karma or piety system, punya, is all about how to enjoy in the best way, materially, now and in the next birth. So this is what Ajamila was focused upon. This is the way his family was. So he studied all the Vedic literatures, but he did not know who is the conclusion of all the Vedic literatures. He got lost in the flowery words of good karma, piety, heavenly destination in the next life, being very pukka in the material sense, and only a smattering of bhakti on the side. But as you have heard, Krishna was very merciful to him just because of that little bhakti on the side. And therefore, from within the heart of Ajamila, even though he became so fallen, the super soul inspired him, name your son Narayan. So this, again, we really went over this yesterday. The history of Ajamila is not incentive for you to become slack. Well, I mean, Ajamila blew it, and at the last minute he picked up his game and got everything. Life without Krishna is suffering. Why delay devotional service? Ajamila's decades without devotional service were a great disaster. Not simply because of all the abominable things he did, but because any kind of life, so-called heavenly or so-called hellish, without devotional service is hellish. So what happened to him? He was a mode of goodness Brahmana. And as the Shastra explains to us, you may execute all your varnashram dharma duties perfectly, Brahmana or what have you. But if you haven't developed a taste for hearing about Krishna, all your piety is useless. You're still on the material platform. So hearing about Ajamila, his glorious past, materially glorious, should give us incentive to take more shelter of Krishna, especially take more shelter of Krishna's name. That is what Ajamila was missing. So his dharma, he was a very good dharmi in terms of material Vedic religiosity. And that couldn't save him, as we'll hear. His jnana, his metaphysical understanding. This is good karma, this is bad karma, this will lead to a higher destination in the next life, this will lead to a lower destination. That couldn't save him either. But just think, a dim reflection of chanting Hare Krishna is what saved him. So just try to understand what your good fortune is if you dedicate your life to attentively chanting Hare Krishna. So the Yamadutas are explaining, he did this. Yes, he had such a background, but then look what he did. Not only look at what he did, the horrors he did, but he never atoned. He never performed any good karma to counteract the bad karma. Therefore, he's a suitable candidate for punishment. He's our man. We're taking him. And the Vishnu Dutas are saying, wait a minute. In spite of everything he did, he managed at the critical moment of death, he managed to chant the name Narayana, even though he was calling his son. Still, this is a very special, this is the most special moment, the moment of death. And he said Narayana. Therefore, we're here. We've showed up, 4 of us, because of the 4 syllables of Narayana. So what did Ajamil do? Once the Yamadutas have described his very stellar background, first-class Pukka material background, but no bhakti focus, just bhakti on the side. What did he do? What happened to him? His father asked him to go to the forest to collect some fruits, flowers, various grasses for yagyas. Just like where I'm staying in the Brahmacharya ashram, I can look out the window and sometimes see devotees. I believe you were plucking some flowers or something. Yes. And so that was Ajamil. He was just in the forest gathering fruits and flowers for Vedic rituals. But then, as he came back home, he saw something that derailed him. Now, what he saw during my youth, we would call high school stuff, and during the youth of persons today, you'd call it primary school stuff. In other words, what's the big deal? On the way home, I'll read, he came upon a Shudra, a very lusty 4th-class man, who was shamelessly embracing and kissing a prostitute. The Shudra was smiling, singing, and enjoying as if this were proper behavior. Both the Shudra and the prostitute were drunk. The prostitute's eyes were rolling in intoxication, and her dress had become loose. Such was the condition in which Ajamila saw them. So what are you thinking? Well, big deal. It's a common, just go for a walk on the beach here. It's a common sight, you know. Why is this person, the man, being designated as a low-class person just because he's, having a good time at the seashore? And why is the woman being designated in such a way? Just for, drank a little bit too much, and at least she had a dress on. That's today's standard. Okay, the dress became loose, but she's wearing a dress. I mean, give her credit, This Bhagavatam just gets a bit too judgmental. What do you think? When people are just trying to have a good time. I was telling this story in Melbourne, how I usually go for a walk by the beach in Melbourne because the temple is just a 5-minute walk from the beach. There's a major thoroughfare, a street, and then you cross the street. It's like 4-lane street with a divider in the middle, and then there's the shore, there's the beach. And so it was a hot day, and people were sunning on the beach. I don't walk on the beach sand. On such a hot day, it's no place for a saffronite to walk. But there's a pier that goes out into the ocean. And the pier is a walkway. Many people walk on the pier out into the ocean and walk back, and there are fishermen on all the sides of the pier. So it's a public thoroughfare. So there I am walking, listening to Prabhupada's lecture, and this young lady, we're not picking on the ladies, it's just she climbs up from the beach, up the stairs, onto the pier, and to my astonishment, she's what we would very charitably say, she's wearing a 2-piece swimsuit. We'd be very charitable in that description. So she just climbs up onto the pier, up the stairs, on this public thoroughfare, and just sprawls out on the pier. And puts a towel over her eyes because she wants to sunbathe on the pier, so she doesn't want her eyes blinded. And just, I'm thinking, what if some ruffian comes along? What if one of these fishermen or some of the public walking back and forth decides to trouble her? She would never know. Her eyes are covered, but with full faith, she's just laid out on the pier with a skimpy swimsuit on and her eyes covered, and not a thought of consternation, not a bit of anxiety at all. I thought, you know what I was thinking? If I could surrender to Krishna like this, I'm in your hands, Krishna. Do with me what you like. And she was surrendering completely to material nature. It's just a natural thing. That's what the sun is out. This is a pier. It's a public place. I've got a bit of clothes on. What's the problem? So that's the way it is these days. What hope is there for us in such times of provocation? If even a Jamila from such an ideal background was derailed just by seeing a sight that we would consider quite childish these days. So what happened to him? He did try to fight back in terms of his mind. He felt the dormant, lusty desires in his heart awakening, and he was falling more and more under the control of those dormant, lusty desires. And so he tried to fight back. The Shastra says, I should not even see a woman. I shouldn't see. But as Shukadeva Goswami explains, the force of Cupid within his heart, he couldn't stop it. And therefore his mind just went wild. He tried. But you see, from just the mode of goodness, he didn't have a secure position. He was not connected to Krishna. His main fortress in life was not bhakti. It was material mode of goodness, Vedic rituals, without knowing that the goal of the Vedic rituals is to attain Krishna, to understand Krishna. So he tried fighting back. Please remember that. But he couldn't get that scene out of his mind. So eventually he sought out that lady that he saw and took her as a servant in his house, and gradually abandoned his very beautiful Pukka first-class Brahmana wife and just consorted with this lady. And to please her, he spent all his inheritance from his father. To please her, he committed crimes to gain income for supporting her and her children. He became just so, perhaps we should say, normal, as today we just call normal. You probably would compliment him. At least he's supporting his family. It's more than a lot of men do. You would say, regardless of the quality of this particular woman, at least he stuck with her. Okay, he ditched his beautiful Brahmana wife. Well, it happens, relationships don't work out, The problem is that all these activities he's doing are atrocious karma. And this is why the Yamadutas are bringing it up. They want you to understand there are reactions to these actions. And we have to do something about it. So why are we being impeded by the Vishnu Dutas? It was a standoff. Neither side could understand the other side. Disputes are often like that. The Yamadutas are sure. There's no doubt that this person is a suitable candidate for punishment by our boss, Yamaraja. And the Vishnu Dutas say, there is no doubt that he's not your man. He chanted Narayana, and that's why we're here at this special moment of death. So there's a massive debate that's going to ensue. The Yamadutas are trying to snatch a Jamila, the soul of a Jamila, from the core of the heart, and the Vishnu Dutas are preventing them. So let's go back to our talk about systems. Ajamila's system was defective. It was the highest system of material existence, but that's not good enough. So we're not scorning his mode of goodness behavior, but we're pointing out that there was a lack of transcendental footing. He had no footing on the platform beyond material nature. And that's a platform that anyone who chants Hare Krishna and engages in devotional service, even from the very beginning, you can have that platform. So our bhakti process is one of increasing absorption in activities that give Krishna pleasure. Those activities centered about chanting Hare Krishna are far beyond what the best good karma can attain for you. So even a neophyte in bhakti, even a brand new beginner in bhakti, has a position far beyond Ajamila. There's no comparison. Even though the newcomer to bhakti may seem a bit rough and precarious, still, what that newcomer has access to is far beyond. It's in another world than what Ajamila had access to. Now sometimes bhakti yoga practitioners, let's be honest, sometimes the road gets a bit rough, right? The roller coaster ride starts and somehow or other the waves in the ocean of material nature start rocking you. Remember yesterday we talked about the boat, the person in the boat, and the waves surrounding the boat, and how gradually through bhakti service, and service in bhakti begins with hearing, chanting, gradually you start to realize that even though the waves are pushing, they're not touching me really, they're touching the boat. And because I'm in the boat, I may think the waves are rocking me, but actually they're not, because I have shelter in chanting Hare Krishna and engaging in devotional service. Gradually that realization thickens. And that's why you need your system. Remember yesterday we talked about how you don't rise as high as your goals are, you sink to the level of your systems. So you have to tinker with your systems. And as we explained yesterday, your systems are composed of various habits, the smallest things you do every day. So if you want to dissect your life, make a list of all the activities you do every day, even as routine as brushing your teeth, and see, do these activities, do these habits contribute to my goal or do they not? Then you're on top of your life. Otherwise, as we said yesterday, all this talk about, I want to change, I want to transform, I want to be a better devotee, I want to be more Krishna conscious, all that goes down the drain after a few days because our system defeats us. So you see, bhakti is very pragmatic, it's very practical. And gradually, as we stick to the bhakti system, we start to see. And it may take some time, but what else is life meant for? We start to see the waves are rocking the boat. They're not actually touching me. And the more I, who am riding in the boat, become focused on Krishna's service, Krishna's pleasure, the more I'll see that I'm immune to the waves. They're there, but they don't capsize me. But in the beginning phases of bhakti, oh my goodness, I went for a walk on Byron Beach, and oh my gosh, I saw such a nice couple. They were relating to each other, and it looked so nice. And lonely me is trying to control my senses, and who's going to be there for me? And what's wrong with the little, So we, in our beginning, our middle stages of bhakti, we can get rocked by this. But as you know how to take more and more shelter of chanting Hare Krishna, you see that you, through the processes of bhakti, can make your way through all that mayhem that is so common these days. So in the purports, as the history of Ajamil is being relayed by the Yamadutas, Prabhupada again and again points out, who can stand up to this provocation? Who can handle all the force of material nature that's so common these days? The force of material nature that makes what Ajamil saw look like, as we said, primary school stuff. It's practically impossible, but if you take shelter of Krishna, and particularly take shelter of chanting Krishna's name with sincerity, you will be protected. So you got two things to deal with here. The impossibility, and sometimes bhakti seems impossible. How am I going to control my senses all my life? I mean, really. And then on the other hand, you have the greatest asset that will protect you. So please focus on those two things. You've got the disastrous provocation that's so common these days, and you have the greatest protection. So be realistic, be pragmatic. Nothing compares to the bhakti lifestyle. I was hearing one of my god sisters describe how she was in France and going through a rough patch, shall we say, in her bhakti. And Srila Prabhupada was visiting France, and in the middle of his lecture, he said something which she felt was especially meant for her. He said that your best day in material existence can't compare to your worst day in bhakti. The peak of your material existence, when, wow, everything's going my way. What a great day. Oh, what a night. Oh, what a weekend. Oh, fantastic. Awesome. That can't compare to your worst day in bhakti. So Prabhupada put everything in perspective. Because, sometimes there are misunderstandings between devotees, lack of appreciation, because devotees are trying to become purified. And so there are some moments of discomfort, shall we say, due to social interaction. But just remember, those worst times, so-called worst times in bhakti, because you're still chanting Hare Krishna, hopefully, those so-called worst times are far superior than your happiest days of material existence. Something to think about. So how do we avoid what happened to Ajamila? We have to know how to take shelter of Krishna. Ajamila was the perfect example of material mode of goodness. And certainly the qualities that he demonstrated work very well when hitched to chanting Hare Krishna and engaging in Krishna service. But unhitched to Krishna, unhitched to the bhakti process, all those good qualities can easily become corroded. The position's very precarious. So this is what the Yamadutas are trying to explain. He's our man. He may have had a very wonderful Brahmana lifestyle, but he's our man, there's no doubt. We're here for him. And who are you, the Vishnu Dutas, to try to break this up? There's no doubt how he plummeted on the roller coaster to the lowest level. And the Vishnudutas are pointing out, but somehow or other, at the most critical moment, he managed to say the holy name of Narayana. Now you might be wondering, one last point. Well, what if I, as a devotee, if I managed to dedicate my whole life to Krishna, what if at the time of death I slip up, I can't remember Krishna? Srila Prabhupada assures you in his purports, as do all the previous acharyas, that Krishna is not ungrateful. If somehow or other you, because of disruption at the time of death, the lifelong practitioner can't remember Krishna, what does Krishna do? He remembers all the service you did and he forces himself into your mind as a reciprocation. Krishna is not some kind of sadist. I'm giving this wonderful bhakti process, but they're not going to remember me at the time of death. No, out of reciprocation with your service. If you dedicated your life to explaining Krishna's glories to others, if you dedicated your life to caring for devotees, Krishna reciprocates. Even if at the time of death you're so disturbed you can't think straight. If you manage to chant Krishna's name but very garbled and indistinctly, doesn't matter. Krishna shows up for you. So this is what a relationship is all about. You want someone who will be there when you really need that person. And no one can surpass Krishna in that. All right, any questions? Yes.
I have heard that in Ajamil's previous life, it was actually cursed to fall down. And I'm just thinking, if that's correct, is Ajamil actually at fault because it was just destined to happen?
If you're in material existence, it's your fault because you jumped into the ocean. So once you jump into the ocean, don't complain about this wave or that wave hitting you. Get out of the ocean. That's why the Yamadutas say, you may live a pious life, you may not, but sooner or later we'll encounter you because you're going to slip up. So the whole point is to get out of the ocean of material existence. It's awkward, what you just pointed out. There are many Puranic details and corollary stories, but basically what you're pointing out is material existence, as we said in the beginning, is awkward. Stuff happens. So who are you going to blame? What are you doing in the ocean in the first place? Now, since Monibandha Prabhu brought up some fine points, we can add that Srila Prabhupada explained that Ajamil's fall down was actually accidental. He was overpowered, outgunned by material nature. He said, well, I guess that lets us off the hook. It's all accidental. No. Accidental means you had no intention, but you were overpowered by material nature due to past habits. And Krishna in your heart knows when it's accidental. That's why the verse is even there in Bhagavad Gita, Pichet Siddharachara. The force of material nature, you've got to respect the power of material nature. I think that's what we're missing here. How powerful is material nature and how helpless we actually are, except for Krishna's shelter. So Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, Apichet Siddharachara, even sometimes a saintly person can slip up, not intentionally, but just due to the power of material nature. But Krishna says such a person is still to be considered saintly. But that verse is not for neophytes. Not that I intentionally fell into some unsavory situation, but Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita I should still be considered saintly. No, the verse applies to someone who has sufficiently established themselves in devotional service and without intention gets overpowered. The old-fashioned example that Prabhupada would give is that before your bhakti life, you were a cigarette smoker, and then you stopped. And then you're in some public place, and someone just out of the blue says, here, have a smoke. And habitually just, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Or perhaps we could try to make a more contemporary example, since cigarette smoking is on the wane. You're visiting some relatives, and your relatives, well, here, have a cuppa. Yeah, a cup of coffee. Actually, I don't drink coffee. Or I could give an example, a medical example for myself. Dr. Dan has forbidden me from taking dairy because I have an allergy. So there, let's say I'm at lunch at someone's house, and someone just, hey, have some yogurt. And I just, oh yeah, it's offered to Krishna. Oops. The doctor said I shouldn't do that. I've tried to bargain with him. How about every 2 weeks? He says, no. But in a social setting, things happen. It's not that you intended. Maybe you're somewhere out and about and you run into an old flame. Oh, let's go for lunch somewhere. One thing leads to another. Your old past overtakes you. You didn't intend for that to happen. You just were going about your affairs, and you ran into someone and all of a sudden your mind was flooded with all these memories. One thing leads to another, and then, oh my God, why did I do that? No intent. You didn't start out intending that, but things happen. So it's not that Krishna, I'm explaining this so we understand, Krishna is not heartless and cruel. So when Prabhupada explained how Ajamil's fall down was accidental, a devotee asked him, what do you think the next question was? Well, how do we know when someone's fall down is accidental or not? And Srila Prabhupada said very softly, only I can tell. So it's nothing to be applied whimsically. Everything depends on intent and sincere desire, and Krishna is in the heart. He knows. You had no intention to do this. You regret it. Does that help with your question? Anything else? Oh, yesterday was all the questions were yesterday, huh? Oh, yes.
Krishna, Guru Maharaj, thank you for the class. You did mention the worst day in Bhakti due to the social interaction.
So-called worst day.
Yeah, due to the social interaction.
Well, sometimes devotees have arguments. Sometimes they really see things in different ways. Gradually, how long did it take for you as a devotee to realize that not everyone thinks the way you do, not everyone does things the way you do? It's an awakening that all of us go through. Yes?
So let's say some time ago there was less social interaction, especially on the virtual platform. So would it be more better for Bhakti at that time?
Well,
always a problem.
there's always, that problem comes in different forms. I remember back in the 70s when there was just a telephone, and we would never call another temple because it's remember a long distance call? Is anyone old enough to remember a long distance telephone call? It's a joke now. But still, the gossip would trickle here and there. Devotees from other temples would visit, and then came the invention of telex machines. No one here remembers telex machines, except maybe Daniel and Hari Bhakti. And anyone else remember telex machines? Yes. Devotees proposed that to Prabhupada, that this would really save the day in terms of ISKCON communications. And Prabhupada said, they'll just simply use it to gossip. Then came what? Fax machines. Most of you can remember fax machines. What came after fax? Huh? Email. And then social media hit. So the propensity is always there. But there's no doubt that not knowing how to use everything perfectly in Krishna's service leads to problems. We'll put it that way. Okay? Yes.
My question is, we were talking about accidental boredom. So when we interacting with devotees, then we can also see within ourselves where someone may present themselves differently, or maybe, for example, I'll give an example. They want to give class or they want to do things, but then they present themselves, oh, do this or do that, or go from Marathi, but they don't do it themselves, but they present themselves like they're doing these things like that. So how do we interact with devotees who are actually putting themselves higher than they are, but and then it's irritating, like they're presenting themselves to be something that they're not really?
Patience and tolerance is required in any kind of group, even materially. Any kind of material relationship or material family of whatever sort these wild days requires patience and tolerance. Sometimes I know devotees get very upset. I'm having a disagreement with that one or this one. And so if it's a male devotee, I often explain to him, just calm down. Disagreements happen, and they're nothing unusual. I said, after all, can you always rely on your wife to agree with you? No. But you're patient and tolerant, right? Yes. So similarly, in the community of devotees, we require some patience and tolerance. Because as I was pointing out to Ananta Vrindavan, once you get past the first 2 years in bhakti in which everyone looks so shining and radiant, familiarity takes over, you start to see faults, and an astonishing truth hits you. Not everyone does things the way I do. Not everyone thinks the way I do. Amazing. Amazing. And depending on your depth of bhakti, you may really overreact to that reality and can even back yourself out the door. So we have to be patient and tolerant. There'll be devotees on different levels. I was explaining this to Dr. Dan, who's visiting here at New Govardhana, check the scene out. So I gently explained to him that, New Govardhana is a collection of many different levels of devotees. All different levels of practice or lack thereof. And so you have to keep that in mind. Prabhupada uses the example of a hospital. In a hospital, there are varying levels of patients. Some always follow what the doctor says, like me. Others 50-50, others not at all. But what is the hospital for? It's for curing people. So bear in mind that the devotional community is actually a hospital meant for curing. And in that hospital, there will be patients of different levels. But the job of the medical staff at the hospital is to keep down the level of potential infection, keep the hospital as sterilized as possible. So you have to be patient, you have to be tolerant. Just like you are with your husband. Does he do everything perfectly? Never good enough. All right, better shut up. Yes.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm just confused with the bhakti element, Maharaj, on Ajamil. He was in the mode of goodness and exemplary character, but he couldn't quite understand from his reading of the Vedas Krishna's position. But you say he had a smattering of bhakti. But bhakti seems, from my understanding, to understand whom you are serving. So can you explain that smattering of bhakti? I'm a bit confused by that.
Even in the Vedic rituals, and I explained that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, beware of the flowery words of the Vedas, all about material prosperity, going to the heavenly planets. For an intelligent materialist person, this is the deal. But we don't have intelligent materialists these days. Therefore, it sounds kind of weird and exotic. Go to the heavenly planets, huh? But for an intelligent, good karma person, this makes complete sense.
How is it that the bhakti came in, the bhakti element?
Because even in the Vedic rituals for going to the heavenly planets, there's a bit of Narayana mentioned there. And also, as we heard yesterday, Prabhupada explained the purport that even in ritualistic Brahmana families, they worship the Narayana Shila. But the whole point is karmic, good karma.
So the bhakti was inadvertent and possibly impersonal also.
It was on the side, a la carte.
Okay.
It wasn't the main meal. But still, just see how Krishna cares. That even though it wasn't the main meal, some or other Ajamil managed to chant without offense. He wasn't chanting Hare Krishna or Narayana to overcome or to counteract sinful activity. He wasn't doing that. That's the greatest offense in chanting. I'll do a sin and then I'll chant and then I'll counteract it. He wasn't doing that.
Is it possible that quite a lot of our attempts at bhakti is like that, similar type of bhakti, a little bit on the side?
You tell me.
Well, we kind of fool ourselves that it's not motivated sometimes, but we just wonder whether we are fully enriched by that bhakti or we're deluding ourselves to think we are doing something right.
As we explained, bhakti is a system. If you follow the system, gradually you'll be purified. Gradually you'll become more and more conscious of Krishna's name, form, qualities, and activities. In the beginning, you may not have full understanding of what you're doing, but as you progress in the system, your heart becomes purified and your dormant bhakti starts to emerge. And you start to feel more and more attracted to Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes. Therefore, we need a healthy diet of devotional service. Just like when I go to see Dr. Dan, well, he knows what I'm eating now, but he wants to know, what are you eating? What's your diet? So what would you say? Well, what does it matter what my diet is, you know? Why are you being judgmental, you know? This one eats this, that one eats that. Just give me a tablet. The diet in bhakti is so important. So, concluding, so I don't keep you from breakfast too long, from your diet of Krishna Prasad. Understand that bhakti is a complete diet, and that's the only shelter against the craziness of today. It is an effective shelter, though, for those who take it. All right, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.